He grew tired of me and suggested we break up. I tried to be humble and stay, as I had countless times before. I wanted to show her my love and make her happy. But the comments before my eyes told me that Liu Zhu Meng was serious this time. She'd fallen in love with someone else. This time, it truly was our last meeting. I hurried, my little finger catching the ticket on the ground with my palm. And then he tucked it deep into his sleeve. This time, the heroine played it for real. Nanpei thought he was teasing her to make peace, but in reality, she wanted to break up with the hero and go back to him. Nanpei was so obsessed with this that he only irritated everyone around him. I saw these comments when Liu Zhu Meng suggested we break up 3 minutes ago. Liu Zhu Meng had broken up with me before. Most of the audience was angry with me and wanted me to talk her out of it, assuring her it wasn't me. I was in shock, just about to begin my performance, but the sound was drowned out by all the chatter. In my eyes, the woman still looked noble, white and graceful legs, a long black skirt, and only the necklace shone with the whiteness of a swan. It wasn't the card I'd given her for her birthday last year, but a cheap stamp, a card from Liu Zhu Meng, who'd never worn such a thing before. The conversation in the purple chats continued, discussing how Nanpei actually knew little about herself. Didn't you see how impatient the heroine was? I was still here, clinging to it, but at the right moment I took the money and walked away, glancing at Liu Zhu Meng. Over the past 3 years, I'd been drawn to her countless times, but this time I didn't waste my energy, and I saw something bitter in Liu Zhu Meng's eyes. Those eyes that had once been full of love were gone, and in that moment I realized the message was true. So, in a slightly hoarse voice, I asked her, "How much will you pay me as compensation for terminating the contract?" Liu Zhu Meng, who hadn't expected such a question, was shocked and took out a large sum of money from his bag. I walked to the market. The red ticket fell to the ground and she looked at me coldly, as if awaiting my next move. I froze, my lips pressed together, staring at the notice board. "Nanpei, hurry and pick it up. This is your last chance." The heroine saw Nanpei's true face and deliberately humiliated him by sacrificing his money, finally realizing that everyone else was after her wealth, and only we, the heroes, were truly out of this mess. But hadn't Nanpei been in love with her before? The breakup was so terrible. What good could this heroine possibly offer the people at the top? At best, she's a soft, little white face. What right can she even talk about dignity? As long as people are alive, they have a right to dignity. While these chats were arguing, I had already collected the money scattered on the ground and stuffed it in my pocket. The chats might be rude, but they were right about something. This was my last chance to get money from Liu Zhu Meng, and I had to be sure. Perhaps because I'd taken the money too casually and was about to leave, I glanced back at Liu Zhu Meng and noticed her face had darkened, and she was almost drooling, an instinctive reaction after 3 years of intense training. Let me reflect on the terms, greeting her with love before the arguments surface again. I returned to reality, abandoning my foolish attempts to unlock the dream of 2 worlds, deciding to go first. Liu Zhu Meng didn't respond to my words. I looked at his back, remembering everything he'd given me over the past 3 years, and felt my heart pounding. At that moment, I let tears cloud my eyes, knowing this was our last meeting and feeling a deep love for him. Isn't he just a source of money? Seeing the advert's words, "Hurry up, lower your head, wipe away your tears," I looked up and saw Liu Zhu Meng standing before me. I didn't know when exactly he turned around, but I was afraid he'd demand my breakup money back. I left quickly. My cheap sneakers accidentally caught the sharp edge of the floor, and black mud from the ground stained my boots. I admit my exit looked a little sloppy, but I left calmly and was back in my rented apartment that night. I'm counting my money and investing in my resume. Liu Zhu Meng gave me 70,000 as compensation for terminating the contract. After leaving his villa, I immediately went to the bank. If he had added another 30,000, I would have saved 5 million, but in the current poor economic situation, I'm afraid to throw money away. Save time, lower interest rates, and at least 1 step closer to earning money. The last bill wasn't bad, but lying in bed, I felt sad. I couldn't come to terms with the loss of money and the loss of Liu Zhu Meng. Once, after leaving my job at a real estate company, I had already been cheated out of 20,000 yuan by an agent. I turned around and got a job in another building where I wasn't paid for my 3-month internship. On my last day, I was trying to find a way to get fired. Being so poor I couldn't afford food, that's when I met Liu Zhu Meng. People change their minds under certain circumstances. I'd been criticized for being a coward since childhood, but for some reason Liu Zhu Meng liked it. He was very generous, giving me 100,000 yuan a month, even though I couldn't afford expensive gifts from him, and compensated for that with praise. He liked it when I followed his lead, and to give him more emotional pleasure, I even took acting classes. After all, 3 love points can turn into 10. Not to mention that thanks to my efforts, Liu Zhu Meng received more than 10 love points from me. But luck and the end are near. Lying on my bed, staring at the ceiling, thinking about tomorrow, I saw the strange messages again. What's going on with the heroine here? Letting the hero know the heroine exists, now the hero gets angry. If I remember correctly, the heroine fell in love with the hero first. The conversations are getting louder and I feel like I'm starting to see double. A particularly frank conversation ended the argument. The heroine had gone crazy and wanted to find Nanpei to hurt the male owner, simply testing whether Nanpei had the courage to print it. At that very moment, the ad disappeared and the phone rang, 305 boxes, and Liu Ru Meng's voice on the other end. It's simple, remembering that the last message had seemed awkward. We parted ways, otherwise it would still be 50,000 or 150,000 or even 300,000. I immediately ran out and got on my bike. I headed toward Liu Zhu Meng's position, nearly getting caught in the roadside announcements. Everyone around me was running faster than me for the promised 300,000. Liu Zhu Meng wanted me to act like a dog in front of its master, and at that moment, I almost realized my situation. But when I first entered the room, my inner self hadn't yet emerged, and a smile was beaming across my face. That's because standing before me on the camera screen was Gu Nianen, the man who had once driven me out of the Gu family and framed the fake young master. In his eyes, 300,000 seemed like a pittance. I fell silent, but Liu Rumeng was still waiting. His refusal left me feeling dejected and out of place. His face darkened and he stared at me with a frown. Before the man was mentioned again on screen, he suddenly reacted and placed it in my hands in front of Gu Nianen. Seeing Gu Nianen's father gritting his teeth and eating his food, I became so bored that I pushed him away, moving away a little and fiddling with my keys in my pocket. Finally, I pulled out the key and threw it in front of him, saying, "I only came here today to return the key you dropped on me." I held my breath, trying to sound calm, though my voice was shaking. Honestly, I didn't even know what the key belonged to. The door to Liu Zhu Meng's family home was equipped with a fingerprint scanner, but I didn't understand Liu Zhu Meng at all. The laughter of his friends echoed around me, and I knew they ignored me, treating me the same way they had those chaotic chats. A fire of ignorance burned in my heart. Suddenly, I raised my hand and pointed at Liu Rumeng. "A good ex-boyfriend should have died. Don't bother me anymore." The air of jealousy stole my breath, and not daring to look at it any longer, I turned and ran out the gate, leaving Luo Zhenqiu in full on the screen. Finally, taking a deep breath, I realized Liu Rumeng abandoned me, but I'm okay. However, it was Gu Nianen he found that hurt me the most, because it was Gu Nianen who took my parents away when I was 17 and was responsible for my years of persecution. I waited until I'd accumulated enough capital, like the hero of the novel. But why did Liu Rumeng become Gu Nianen's patron? Helplessly collapsing against the wall in grief, my face contorted by what I saw, I found myself in a dire situation. The chats were silent. I felt a little sad. What do you mean, a little? I was genuinely hurt, and I couldn't help but crouch down and cry until someone placed a piece of paper in front of me. I simply covered my ears, looking at the reflection. The man wasn't worth it. Why love and torture myself so much? Like smoke and dreams, I remained silent until she suddenly sat down next to me. She raised her hand to wipe my face with a napkin, confessing she hadn't expected such genuine affection. To get my sister to let me go, she took the opportunity to publicly scold her, though her tone struck me as a little odd. A slight blush touched her ear and she spoke, "Gu Han, since you're with me, I should treat you better than my sister." Noticing my gaze, she rubbed her hair sheepishly. "Of course you're with me, you're my boyfriend. I'll give you everything my sister gives, including 100,000 a month. We're together." I carelessly made a promise, even though Liu Ruyan clearly had proof. Another huge star was about to shine on her face, but before she could say anything, Liu Zhu Meng's figure emerged from the shadows. Haha, the heroine had thought the man was madly in love with her, and had even made a bet with those around her. The man would have rejected Liu Ruyan's offer without hesitation, but only now did I realize Liu Rumeng was watching me from the darkness with unbearable sadness. Seeing her, I stepped out of the shadows myself. She looked at me coldly, noticing Liu Ruyan and I holding hands. Liu Ruyan just smiled at her. "How disgusting. Congratulate me on finding a boyfriend. After all, you often encouraged me in front of my parents. Now I've found him, so be happy for me." Liu Zhu Meng's face expressed displeasure, but Liu Ruyan continued, "However, congratulations are unnecessary because I want to enjoy some time alone with my boyfriend." Liu Zhu Meng himself seemed to be laughing at this moment. And soon new events followed. After this post appeared, the situation worsened, but Liu Ruyan was not at all embarrassed and gently patted my hand. Throwing a challenging glance at Liu Zhu Meng, he said, "Of course he's my boyfriend, so little sister, are you staying here?" "To demonstrate your intimacy with my boyfriend?" he asked, pulling me in for a kiss. It all happened too quickly. Panic gripped my body and I desperately clung to Liu Zhu Meng out of the corner of my eye. Biting my lips tightly, waiting for the storm to begin, at the most critical moment, I noticed Gu Nianan frozen on the edge. "Why did this take so long? Stop ignoring me and Liu Ruyan and focus all your resentment on Liu Rumeng's displeasure." With his appearance, Liu Rumeng's ordinary expression quickly changed to a gentle one, and Gu Nianan suddenly raised his hand, stroked his thin hair, sighed heavily, and took a deep breath. "Sorry for keeping you waiting. As someone who's been devoted to Liu Rumeng for 3 years, I've never seen such a tender side of her before. Liu Ruyan right now." I extended a finger, lightly hooking it around her arm, and looked down at her. But noticing her blank stare, I merely moved my lips silently in greeting. They'd already exchanged a few words. Could a decent guy really be so worthless? My sister even coddled him like a child. I chuckled at her naive expression, feeling as if Gu Nianan and Liu Zhu Meng were standing right in front of me. I didn't feel like laughing at all. It felt like they could read my every thought. Liu Ruyan gently pinched my arm. For these two, the entire world seemed like a private stage. "Let's talk somewhere else," I said, getting ready to leave. But at that very moment, Gu Nianan called out loudly, "Ruyan," Liu Ruyan's name. But she wasn't looking at her at all, but at me. It seemed she'd been struggling to get a word out for a long time. "I'm glad you found someone you like," she said, "but you've had a hard time since childhood." Easy to say, hard to believe. Some people deserve a wide-eyed stare. Online comments are now filtered. The former generosity of the male protagonist is showing. After all, he once saved the main character from her partner, and now he's actively helping another woman. Also that she wouldn't be inadvertently deceived. His voice was filled with pure enthusiasm, but one detail was particularly striking. If my memory serves me right, the male host stood directly in front of his chosen one and her companion, as if about to declare, "I intend to steal this woman from her partner, and you're only getting in the way of other people's feelings. You'd better call your uncle." The whole episode seemed like a ridiculous setup. A multitude of pretty faces hovered around the main character. "You're sticking up for your partner, aren't you? You're not like him, are you?" People said around them, but their voices were quickly drowned out by the general noise. I merely lowered my gaze. My lips had become accustomed to being constantly swept around in all sorts of ways. And to hell with it, this wasn't the first time I'd been scolded, and this kind of treatment was commonplace. Ever since my fate crossed with Liu Zhu Meng, such conversations had been haunting me. At that moment, Liu Zhu Meng, sitting across from me, suddenly broke the silence. 500,000, what nonsense. I'm already reacting automatically. Suddenly, impressed by Liu Zhu Meng's words, he looked me straight in the eye and pronounced each word carefully. "I'm willing to pay 500,000 to buy you back from your sister. Why on earth are you even giving him money?" This type of person was born at the very bottom, yet suffered from inordinate greed. "And you're still feeding them? They'll never have enough," Gu Nianan snapped, demonstratively putting his arm around Liu Ru Meng's shoulders to show me his strength. I noticed that the necklace around his neck was worth exactly the same as Liu Ru Meng's own jewelry. Then I remembered a comment online. This guy was deliberately wearing other people's clothes to attract Liu Zhu Meng's attention. And when Liu Zhu Meng was ready to give in to temptation but was afraid of being deceived again, he'd simply reveal his true identity as the young master of the Fu family. That whole image of a poor, hardworking man was just a carefully crafted cover. Thinking about it, I couldn't help but chuckle. That's how cunningly he'd seduced Liu Rumeng. I remembered the day I was thrown out of the Gu family mansion in disgrace. Gu Nianan stood at the door and presented me with a parting gift. With all his feigned kindness, he handed me an old leather case which he had absolutely no use for. "Brother, this thing would suit you much better," he declared. "True nobility cannot be bought with mere blood. I was raised differently. My parents gave me everything they had. Look at me and look at yourself, Gu Han. You don't stand a chance in this life. Instead of trying unsuccessfully to break into high society, wouldn't it be better to pack up and go back to your backwater? It's not too late to start over. There's work out there for you." Then he threw me a phrase that's etched itself in my memory. "No matter how poor people dress up in designer clothes, they'll never be able to pass for rich anyway." Now everything's been turned upside down. The rich heir himself is dressed as a beggar and playing the role of a pauper. How wonderful this world is. I looked up at the dark sky and sighed heavily, after which I finally answered them. What's going on? What fools Ruyan and I are, I thought to myself simultaneously. He addressed the pure-blooded girl with obvious aggression, but I wasn't about to remain silent either. We exchanged glances, and we simultaneously felt a spark flash in our eyes. I stepped forward, turning the conversation to Liu Zhumeng. 500,000? It's not much. I have 500,000 too, and I'm not going to pretend to anyone, I said, slightly raising my outstretched finger while Gu Nianan exhaled loudly, his mouth hanging open in amazement. And you, sit at home, dependent on your parents, even though being a spoiled brat clearly isn't enough for you. You're always forced to pretend to live in some miserable backwater and call this farce your home. After all the hardships of life, you think you're the center of the universe. My voice broke beyond recognition on the last word, but it was simply impossible to hold back. I've been humiliated for too long. I've had enough. And they continue to persist. Fortunately, Liu Ruyan decided to support me in time. After all, she was the beloved daughter of the influential Liu family, and even Liu Zhumeng wouldn't dare confront her. Since such an opportunity presented itself, it would be foolish to pass up the opportunity to lean on a strong shoulder. I wasn't planning on taking revenge right now, but the urge to vent my pent-up anger burned within me. Returning home, I could only clutch the edge of the blanket convulsively and replay this nightmare in my head until midnight. Grandiose scenarios of a triumphant revenge were born in my thoughts, and I wound up again and again until there was almost nothing left of my impotent rage. At that moment, I didn't utter a word. You're all just fools trying to appear happy. I turned sharply, pulling the stunned Liu Ruyan with me, and we hurried away. We walked proudly, though even then my back involuntarily hunched over from the strain. I desperately tried to maintain a proud posture in front of these two spectators, fully aware that no one but me would see any pride in their eyes. I even felt a little sorry for them. At least, judging by those conversations, they'd once again made a serious mess of things. And how do you like a spectacle where the main character looks so pathetic? Could he really have fallen seriously in love with the heroine? What if this is all just a cunning show designed to break her will? Judge for yourself. If rumors are to be believed, the heroine is greedy for money, but when he himself offered her a tidy sum, she proudly refused, even scolding her harshly. And now she's even demonstratively stolen her daughter. Isn't this just to drive the heroine to a white heat? Or perhaps this is a peculiar form of stubborn tenderness. Is it possible to combine such iron determination and tender care? Perhaps there are genuine feelings at play here. I'm even afraid to read the paragraphs that follow. My head is in chaos and my knees are shaking. Guhan, Liu Rumeng, and only fragments of frightened cries. I'd rarely seen her so frightened even in the most difficult times, but I couldn't stop. Liu Ruyan ran after me, shouting as she went, "Don't turn around, don't listen to them, just don't stop." We were racing so fast that when I jumped into the car, I almost hit the gas cap with my foot. The steering wheel was shaking. She was desperately turning the wheel, muttering under her breath. I desperately wanted to tell her that the chase had long since ended and that no one was chasing us, but the lump in my throat prevented me from saying a word. Everything that was happening seemed like an incredibly breathtaking adventure. Later that evening, this feisty girl finally drove me home. Finding herself in my modest one-room apartment, Liu Ruyan glanced around the room with a confused yet still proud expression and, clasping her shoulders at the threshold, said, "Is this your place? There's only one bedroom. I thought this was a mansion for 20 people." Until now, when I'd spent most of my time with Liu Zhumeng, I'd barely encountered Liu Ruyan. Every time Liu Zhumeng mentioned her, there was a hint of pent-up irritation in her voice. But now, looking at this strong woman, it seemed to me that she was 1,000 times better than all that gang of rich kids hanging around Liu Rumeng. I must have been staring too much because Liu Ruyan suddenly became embarrassed. Her leg cramped from sheer nerves and she didn't know what to do with her hands. I quickly turned off the air conditioner, squatted down next to her, and quietly said, "I thought you were going to tell me you're flush with cash, but you're not going to stoop to my level of humiliation. I admit, my sister is a master at this." I had a rather strange look at her at that moment. After all, the apartment really was tiny, and the room I was renting consisted essentially of just a bedroom. "You're just telling it like it is. We're normal people, not crazy people," Liu Ruyan nodded, finding my words perfectly reasonable. This brief scene helped ease the oppressive atmosphere in the room. The standard of living had recently left much to be desired, although the neighborhood was not bad. There was barely any money left in the account, so we had to economize on everything. In the end, we each opened a box of yogurt. Sitting on the windowsill and looking out at the city at night, Liu Ruyan, just like me, began licking the drops off the protective cap, staining her upper lip with white yogurt. She turned to me and asked, "Gu Hanning, what are you planning to do now?" I couldn't immediately find an answer. Catching my gaze, Liu Ruyan quietly added, I noticed her eyes redden again, and for a moment I was at a loss. You're still thinking about him, right? All her previous words of support had been nothing more than an attempt to cheer me up. Come on, come here, she said, spreading her arms wide for a hug, but at the very last moment she hesitated in the doorway. May I? She asked timidly, looking up at me. I was seriously considering raising chickens. Once I returned to normal life, I was about to make my 3,500th small purchase at the market to start fresh. But then my gaze fell on Liu Ruyan's hand. She sat in her previous place, looking at me with extreme tension on her face. I even touched my own face in surprise, trying to figure out what was going on, and finally answered her question. Why did I even need to raise poultry? Liu Ruyan immediately pulled herself together and began to seriously discuss the plan with me. Because my old farm was burned to the ground. Who dared? There weren't even any chickens left, I sighed heavily, recalling the past. I hadn't wiped the dusty windows in this house in so long that it felt like an eternity. The story was long and complicated. In short, from childhood I was very different from the other village kids. I looked nothing like my grandparents, and I'd never even laid eyes on my parents. The locals would gossip that I wasn't their grandson at all. Back then, the village was utterly unknowable. There was no proper school, and the local witch doctor would constantly frighten everyone with tales of evil spirits. I felt as if I'd been sold to some demons. That night, I ran away from home. And then, as Liu Ruyan recalled, wait, did they really decide to chase me? The old men ran to borrow 3 frying pans from a neighbor, saying, pour oil on them right there on the road. Liu Ruyan started giving her advice, but then a huge tree fell right on top of my grandfather's outdoor stove. And our little chicken coop burned to the ground. After assessing the scale of the disaster, Liu Ruyan and Wen Yan merely shook their heads sympathetically. No one had expected such a turn of events. Wait, is this an airport? Why is it only mentioning some pathetic chicken coop? Wen Yan, I only have 2 arms. The chickens will lay eggs, but there were other creatures there too. Given the circumstances, I already owed these 2 a whole poultry farm. So now you're just working hard to save up the startup capital for your business? Wen Yan asked, and I nodded. I really did need to move on. In truth, I'd long ago realized that this whole beautiful fairy tale of their life together was just another attempt to deceive me. I did have to pay my bills. That time, I'd simply borrowed 3 sacks of grain from a neighbor. Luckily, the creditors weren't in a hurry to demand money from us. I remember how the entire village flocked to the foot of the mountain that day when they finally found the root of an old tree on the eastern slope where wild animals roamed. I burst into tears, feeling a terrible pullback. It was then that it dawned on me that I absolutely had to go back. It wasn't about any lofty matters. It was simply that people dear to me lived here. I desperately wanted them to come to town one day and honor their ancestors' memory. For me, this was a huge risk, as the old people were aging with each passing day. I naively believed that because my wealthy parents had such enormous resources, then if I just tapped into these Phoenix resources, it would be more than enough to provide my grandparents with a comfortable retirement. But I clearly overestimated my abilities. The richer the family, the stricter their rules. The Gu family took me back only to once again show me the downside of their upbringing. How could I possibly help this clan in any way? Unfortunately, my grandmother taught me something completely different: to remain passionate, sincere, kind, and never betray my original ideals. But this soulless machine demanded only hypocrisy. A cold and deadly lie. Soon after the Gu family had completely abandoned me, they allowed Gu Nyan to carry out a dirty scheme to intimidate me and pin the blame on me. After all, in their eyes, the expulsion was a success. This was ironclad proof of Gu Nyan's guilt. But I had promised my grandmother that no matter what, I would continue studying in the city. At least I would get a decent college degree, find a decent job, and be able to return home with my head held high. Surviving during that period was truly unbearable. But all that was behind us now. This nightmare was over. Liu Ruyan's hand gently rested on mine, sharing its warmth. Turning around, I saw she was crying bitterly. I knew you were nothing like Gu Nyanan, she sobbed. Can poor people pretend so sincerely? She fiddled with a paper napkin, her eyes watering. When I instinctively reached for my yogurt container, my fingers involuntarily tightened around my wrist. I couldn't afford more than 1 serving a day, otherwise I wouldn't make it to the end of the month. I ate in silence, lost in my thoughts. This sight made Liu Ruyan cry even harder. Oh really, what can I say? She blinked away her tears and, looking straight into my soul, quietly said, I love you. Looking at her, I somehow clearly understood that at that moment we were both holding on with all our strength. Can I hug you? I asked, looking at her. Liu Ruyan was already a grown woman, but there was still a childish purity in her eyes that reminded me of Chen Lu. I sighed, pulled her into a hug myself, and then gently pulled away and pushed her toward the exit. If that's it, then go home, I said. I have an interview tomorrow. I need to look for a job. Liu Ruyan, already reaching the door, suddenly turned around. She looked at me intently and asked that classic question, "What's our relationship like now?" A variety of expectations clashed within me. I rubbed the bridge of my nose, feeling my head begin to ache from the uncertainty. Without waiting for my answer, Liu Ruyan visibly wilted and asked questioningly, "You weren't against being my boyfriend before, were you? What's changed now?" I was a little taken aback. "Are you kidding me?" I thought. "You just want to spite your sister and annoy Gu Nianen because you've never been able to get along with her. After all, you've always been against your sister's chosen son-in-law and vowed to expose him." For a long time, she seemed pure and innocent, but then, when she had an epiphany and fell in love with him, it was too late. She had become his son-in-law in the eyes of his family. So Liu Ruyan never married, silently observing him from the sidelines her entire life. At first, I thought her announcement was just empty talk, but I changed my mind long ago. I wanted to confess to her this evening, but you're too smart not to notice my change. Those dark thoughts I harbored turned out not to be so bad, but admitting them felt shameful, as if I had no heart left. I'd already read all this in the news. It seemed she was feigning stupidity just to get me out of here quickly, but Liu Ruyan was persistent. "What happened before is irrelevant," she said. "I just want to know, are you willing to pay 100,000 a month, esteemed lady?" Before leaving, having received my contact information, Liu Ruyan suddenly changed her tone to a gentle one and even created a chat for the two of us. Upon returning home, she immediately wrote that she would definitely see Gu Han tomorrow. Liu Ruyan and Liu Zhumeng are like night and day. Previously, when I worked for Liu Zhumeng, I was constantly studying her character, adapting and acting as a mere bodyguard tailored to her needs. But Liu Ruyan said something completely different. "I like that you're real," flashed through my mind. We hadn't talked much, but her words gave me confidence. So for the date, I wore my favorite simple shirt, jeans, and sneakers. I didn't expect Liu Ruyan to arrive looking so casual. Our eyes met and we were both surprised. No one had ever spoken to me so casually. While I was eating, she took my napkin without embarrassment. She would squat down to tie her shoelaces or suddenly run up behind me to pick a flower from a tree. Her unceremonious antics unsettled me, but I had no one to share them with. I had no friends or family in this city. So I continued to seek out Liu Ruyan. One day, she was setting off fireworks on the beach, and it was very noisy. I grabbed her hand, but the wind made my voice very quiet, so I leaned over and shouted, "Liu Ruyan, you're so special." She turned around with a sparkler in her hand. "What? I like you too." We went to amusement parks, cafes, and movies. No one ever took me to such places in the village. They wouldn't even dream of it, and later, when I was poor, I was afraid to even look at such establishments. And Liu Zhumeng didn't like it when I stuck my neck out, so I could only wait for her at home. Or follow her around, visiting posh places to look like a worthy companion. But Liu Ruyan was different. It felt like she was treating me like a real person for the first time. She acted exactly as she promised. And how did Liu Zhumeng treat me? She just tossed me little things every now and then, a hairdryer, a model, a popsicle stick. I kept these things at home, hesitating to sell them, and I took them for walks. Finally, I had my own project I could afford and the opportunity to treat Liu Ruyan to something delicious. We laughed, and I finally began to understand the feelings of the old Liu Rumeng. It turns out everything can be so simple. But even late at night, I asked myself, do you really love Liu Ruyan? I didn't know the answer, but I knew one thing: I had been completely alone for too long. I was never taught to have fun until I dropped. While the village children played, I went home to cook. Without parents, I was forced to act like an adult. But my grandparents were with me then, and when I found my parents, life only got worse. The hunger and cold of my youth turned into a real nightmare. In recent years, I lived in constant fear and rebellion until numbers started appearing on my bank card. In that sense, I was grateful to Liu Zhumeng. But my heart remained empty. So when Liu Ruyan baked me a cake for my birthday, I couldn't resist calling her secretly to tell her I had enough money. This year, when the wheat was harvested, I brought her some of the harvest. I looked back and saw Liu Ruyan laughing at me. I wanted her face to glow golden. Even in my shabby suit, she didn't look like me, she was herself. At that moment, I lost my mind and asked her to come home with me, though I immediately wanted to take it back. I dreamed of taking my beloved away from the city, but Liu Ruyan didn't give me time to think. She looked me in the eye and asked if I wanted to go to her parents' house. Maybe the cream on the cake was a bit too sweet, but I was so overjoyed that I immediately agreed. Meeting Liu Zhumeng at the Liu family's old mansion was inevitable. I knew this day would come. Standing before her, I was nervous. Liu Zhu Meng looked at my intertwined fingers with Liu Ruyan's with a sardonic smile. Father and mother will not approve of your union, she said in her calm, objective tone. I wanted to sink into the ground. But when I raised my head, I was stunned. The veins in Liu Zhu Meng's arms were bulging, and she was flushed with hidden rage. Let this woman disappear, I thought. After all, I considered her a heroine. But a heroine who plays with emotions for status evokes nothing but disgust. The whole plot seemed to fall apart, and I realized there was no point in returning the money anymore. Liu Zhu Meng stood in the middle of the room, her face impassive, clutching a glass. I could see the people around me growing angry. They no longer cared that they were insulting me. But at that moment, she seemed the center of everything. I noticed fingerprints on her face. The door in front of me had opened. I walked out of there in complete dismay. Mother Liu stood behind me, elegantly sipping tea. She always claimed to support her children's choices, but now she coldly snapped, "Mr. Gu, don't show your face again." Gu Nianen's face was one of utter humiliation. His attitude toward me changed. He no longer played games with Liu Zhu Meng. Seeing that she was still there, he tried to speak, but she didn't even look up from the screen, as if he didn't exist. Gu Nianen's anger exploded at me again, his face twisted with hatred. "You again? Such narcissism, you're not part of our circle, why are you trying to infiltrate?" The more he spoke, the more agitated he became, approaching me. He raised his hand to strike, but the next second, Liu Ru Meng stepped between us. The Gu family's business was in trouble, and he wanted to use Lion Ying to save the situation through Gu Nianen. "You won't become a better person just by changing your appearance," she said. "You better admit it right now. Whose side are you on?" "If I'm not mistaken, Liu Ru Meng is protecting me right now." Gu Nianen and Wen Yan turned around, stunned. The stream of insults online surrounding Liu Ru Meng had reached a frenzy, but Liu Ruyan's appearance quickly brought me out of my stupor. "Don't pay any attention to them, they've all gone mad," she whispered. I bowed to them, afraid someone would hit me goodbye. But no. As I passed Liu Zhu Meng, all I heard was her quiet, barely audible apology. She was saying something, but I didn't have time to make out the words. Mrs. Liu was waiting for us in the living room. She'd seen her daughter tormenting Gu Nianen. I was nervous, but Mrs. Liu was unexpectedly polite. She was simply showing me their daily life, so similar to Liu Ru Meng's. Everything that surrounded her, the clothes, the dishes, the little things on the table, cost a fortune, something I couldn't have earned in half a lifetime. At that moment, I understood what Mrs. Liu was trying to say. Liu Ruyan and I were people from different worlds. Even if we're eating fast food in a rented apartment today and she playfully smears oil on my nose, our paths will never cross in the future. I can't help Liu Ruyan. I can't let this high society girl return to the village with me. I woke up with the feeling of cream on my cheek as if it had been a dream. Ms. Liu's words echoed in my head. Returning home, I went to the factory in Naikengbao. There was no smoke in my heart, only emptiness. Liu Ruyan's smile gradually faded. Finally, I got up and left alone. Mrs. Liu left Liu Ruyan to talk. At the door, I turned around. She was nodding, as if arguing with someone invisible in the distance. "Don't fight for me," I wanted to shout at her. "Not everyone in this world has loving parents." I saw how much Madame Liu cared for her, and I didn't want to be the cause of her suffering. I was devastated, my legs carrying me away. I bowed, looking into Liu's reddened eyes. He had always seemed noble and reserved to me. I was used to pleasing him. But now Liu Zhu Meng was on edge. He grabbed me by the coat and dragged me along with him. "You turned around and looked at me. You can't just leave without talking." He suddenly bit my wrist. I screamed. He said he'd let me go, but now he couldn't let me go. Why can he and I can't? The question seemed insane. After all, he was the one who broke up with me. I rubbed my wrist, watching Liu Zhu Meng gradually become surrounded by red letters of online comments. The words grew angrier and angrier. Some wished him dead, others demanded that he replace the heroine on the throne. These words turned into an icy wave. Fear drove me away, but Liu Zhu Meng held me tight. On the contrary, I saw a strange gratitude in his eyes. He said, "Gu Han, I can take you home. I can even leave you there." I remained silent, turning my back to him. "Let's get together again, okay?" Liu Zhu Meng sighed. "I'm sorry," I replied, "but I need to go home and raise chickens." I turned him down. I knew Liu Zhu Meng had already made inquiries about my life. He laughed at me behind my back. "How much money do you need for this farm? You've earned enough in a year with me, but what happens next? You stayed with me because you loved me, right?" Wen Yan, looking back, I felt something was wrong. I dreamed of saving for living expenses, building an airfield, settling the elderly there. I had it all figured out. I don't need to return to the city to save up 5 million. I could earn more. But Liu Zhu seemed unprepared for that answer. His face twisted in pain. Then I'll give you a lot more money. You don't need to raise chickens. You can live like a king. I'll take your old people. No need, I replied under his watchful gaze. I'm not greedy. Finally, I said what they had been waiting for 3 whole years. Waiting for my reply, do you rich people really think money can buy absolutely everything? With these words, I gently pushed Liu Ruyan's hand away. Leaving her standing in the road in utter confusion, I felt the crushing pain, and even the malicious comments online suddenly fade into the background, sharing her confusion. I had no idea what lay ahead, but I knew one thing for sure: I still had a lot of character. The main thing was not to give in to madness. I told myself that if I decided to return to my native land, then I would return. By that point, only the last shred of my former dignity remained. After leaving the Liu family's old mansion, I walked a good 7 miles to the mountain road to catch a taxi. While waiting, I finally had time to give in to my melancholy. I knew perfectly well that Liu Ruyan and I had no future, even if it was all doomed from the start. But he was a truly good man, even though we'd only known each other for a short time and he seemed like just a lonely traveler. He took up too much space in my soul. Next to him, I felt like a carefree child again. As a student, my only mentors were my seniors, but when I entered adulthood, I had no one left. As I walked the winding path of fate, I didn't even dare look back, feeling completely alone against the world. That's why, even if only for a moment, even if only in a dream, I so easily allowed myself to dissolve in this feeling. I desperately needed to feel someone's warmth next to me. Returning home that night, I completely cut off all contact with Liu Ruyan, knowing that the Liu clan would never allow him to remain apart for long. It seemed as if he was serving some kind of punishment, just like in those high society dramas. After 2 days of sitting at home, completely alone and eating almost nothing, I finally grabbed my suitcases. I called my grandparents and told them I was returning to the village. The old people were overjoyed and immediately asked me to bring a new shepherd's whip from the big city. I was returning to my native land. After a moment's thought, I added a ceremonious air into the phone. I was returning to government service as a civil servant. Having said this, I suppressed a smile, though a soft note still crept into my voice. Okay, since you're already over 20, you can be a village chief, my grandfather replied with a heavy sigh. A little later, I called them back and heard his disconsolate sigh. Don't hold it against Grandpa. He's a stern man, but he's forgiving, Grandma defended him. He just doesn't want you to disappear into this wilderness at such a wonderful age. We're old and can't help you, so we're afraid of becoming a burden. All my life, the old people fussed over me like the fragile string of a kite, afraid to let go, but times have changed. You've grown up, you've achieved your goal, my grandmother continued. It's time for us to loosen our grip, now you're free. Listening to her, I could hardly hold back my tears. Grandma, I haven't achieved anything at all. All these years in town, they've only laughed at me and looked down on me. What? Come back soon, I heard my grandfather decisively grab the phone. Passing the phone from hand to hand, they quickly came to the only correct conclusion. All these city people are nothing but crooks, so I won't set foot there again. Throw away that plastic suitcase of yours and don't even think about dragging it along. It's bad for your health, my grandmother admonished, dictating the village elder's number. Returning home late that evening by hitchhiking, I found the old people waiting for me right at the entrance to the village. My silence then was filled with both bitter sadness and quiet joy. After hanging up and tidying myself up, I was about to take out the trash. But as soon as I cracked the door, Liu Ruyan's slightly haggard face appeared on the threshold. Her eyes still radiated purity and warmth. Noticing her timidly swaying toward me, I swallowed the lump in my throat. I'm no match for you, Liu Ruyan, go back. Don't go against your parents' wishes because of me, they care about you, I said. But at that moment he lightly pushed me in the chest and pressed his forehead right against mine. We were so close that I could physically feel his thick eyelashes gently tickling my eyelids. Let's just say goodbye, he said quietly, pulling me along with him. On our last day, he took me to the very bookstore where I'd first met Liu Zhu. Honestly, I still couldn't understand why the place felt so familiar or where that golden cage had come from, but that day, it all came together. I remembered how back then I'd hide in the farthest corner of the bookstore. Winter was brutal, I had no money for new warm clothes, and I only came here to warm up for free by the air conditioner. Looking out the glass at the chilly autumn streets, I dreaded the closing time and thought about my hopeless life. About the old people in the village, about the dead end my life had reached. I was utterly helpless and crushed. It was then that Liu Zhu Meng threw me that postcard, offering money in exchange for my supposed freedom, though at that moment I couldn't stomach the food. Freedom seemed like an empty phrase, but I obediently followed it. And now Liu Ruyan pointed to the very corner where I had once hidden. Looking down, I froze. In fact, the sisters' relationship had always left much to be desired. Although Liu Ruyan never said so out loud, I understood perfectly well. As an heiress, crushed by unbearable demands from childhood, she fiercely hated the humiliation their parents inflicted on them. I listened silently, my gaze downcast. I thought Liu Ruyan wanted to pour out his heart, to talk about the colossal pressure of family life and how much Liu Ru Meng despised his own life. But no. He only admitted that he was consumed by guilt, having seen me with his own eyes during those 2 fateful episodes. The first time this happened was completely by accident. When, following the GPS's directions to find a cheap bookstore, I caught his eye through a glass display case. This was hardly news to him. As an intern at his parents' small company responsible for delivering water and documents, he'd often hung around among the employees. At first, he didn't pay much attention to me, but one day, while passing a tea shop, I overheard some older colleagues talking. He seems like a smart guy, but it's a shame that the current cost of student tuition is out of reach for many. He was destined to leave. I remember waiting for my colleague at the entrance that day, pierced by a cold wind, but still smiling. No big deal, the internship will be over soon, I'll find a stable job, and I'll definitely take you to the big city for some fun, I thought then. City dwellers know how to get along, I told myself, smiling through clenched teeth, but it was all a lie. Liu Ruyan knew the truth. The small firm where I was trying to make a buck was just about to carry out massive layoffs. Competition among the staff was fierce, and those senior colleagues probably used me as a silent workhorse. Liu Ruyan himself in those years lived a carefree life, sincerely believing that if a person truly works hard, their life will definitely improve. He was sure of a happy ending to this story until he ran into me in that bookstore, trembling, stunned, wearing only a thin coat. That day, shocked by what he saw, Liu Ruyan wanted to rush for the door, but circumstances stopped him. When they left, her parents asked her to buy textbooks with her sister, Liu Zhu Meng, in an attempt to mend their relationship. It was the first attempt in years to show concern, and it was also the first time she saw firsthand how Liu Zhu Meng educated people. When they met again, I was a different person, dressed in a style entirely befitting Liu Zhu Meng's perverse taste. Liu Zhu Meng had essentially taken me under his wing and brought me to this crossroads. I was so incredibly nervous, following him around, while no one else in his inner circle even considered showing up. He liked me despite all the mockery he'd meted out to me because of my simplicity and poverty. But he wasn't angry, merely casting cold, distant glances at Liu Ru Meng. Liu Ruyan was literally drowning in a searing sense of guilt in those moments. He couldn't decide whether he was filled with rage or grief. He clearly saw that Liu Zhu Meng's future had long been written out according to the script of a profitable marriage to a wealthy heir. By taking away a person's true heart, he could give nothing in return but destruction. Liu Ruyan's anxiety for me grew with each passing day. He desperately tried to somehow fix everything, but he realized his own impotence. All Liu Ru Meng could shower me with were crude material goods and money. At those dinner parties, looking at her reflection, this guy seemed painfully lonely. He watched us from the shadows, waiting for the moment when Liu Ru Meng left the room for the second time. That's when Liu Ruyan realized this was his chance. After all, Liu Ru Meng had already fallen for another man, an equally poor but unyielding one. Even when Liu Ru Meng contemptuously threw money at him, he rose up in anger, displaying iron pride. Don't think that everything can be sold for money. Human dignity has no price. His mask was impeccable, but Liu Ruyan sensed the falseness in everything. Whether it was incriminating evidence against an elite snake farm, information accidentally leaked to the press, or petty behind-the-scenes intrigues, he was perfectly aware of all this cheap showmanship. How could his clever sister fail to notice the obvious? When an angry Liu Ruyan asked him point-blank, "So what should we do now?" Liu Ru Meng merely said with a strange smile, "If you like him, go and get him." They say that since sincerity can't be bought for free, one can simply pay the required amount. That time, Liu Ruyan tried to seize the initiative, turning to her sister. "I've been trying to get through to you for a long time, but I've never had a chance." Liu Ru Meng's response, she merely lowered her long eyelashes, hiding her gaze. In short, the whole masquerade thing turned out to be a complete fabrication. Standing outside that very bookstore, Liu Ruyan looked at me with a guilty look. "I'm sorry, Guhan, I lied to you. All those words that were supposed to hurt my sister were a complete lie. I deliberately orchestrated our rapprochement. And this whole story of supposedly accidental exposure was a fabrication from start to finish. I was simply keeping an eye on you, making inquiries, because I desperately wanted to give you at least a modicum of light. It's all right, I replied, looking at her. Of everyone here, you've hurt me the least, and I'm not nearly as miserable as you think. The evening heather softly carried my words across the earth. We even breathed in unison with this vast world. If you even had the desire to help me, it means you're an incredibly kind person at heart, I said. I'm incredibly glad to meet you. It was on that day when Liu Zhumeng opened the door. I felt like I'd peered into a pure heart. Although he always maintained a cool, overly polite demeanor, I constantly told myself not to get needlessly attached. Who knew that all this time, someone had been silently watching me from behind the glass, empathizing with my troubles even before I realized the extent of my despair. Can I kiss you goodbye? I looked up at Liu Ruyan, tears glistened in her eyes. Nodding in agreement, I felt a light, almost weightless touch of lips, gentle, slightly naive, and infinitely fragile. Meanwhile, random paragraphs of commentary floated into my mind. Liu Ruyan's cold hand, the crisscrossing beams of searchlights, and the whispers of invisible enemies. This frantic text spun around in my head like an endless carousel, with every character, both male and female, seeming simultaneously guilty and innocent. If this continues, I'll completely lose my mind. However, in the original plot, everything was pretty much the same. The main character gets into trouble. The main character, encouraged by envious people, loses her temper on the road, hysterically hits the gas, and accidentally hits a guy. And then she nobly helps cover their tracks, and everyone continues to live happily ever after. Could it really have been an accident? The driver clearly saw the figure on the side of the road and deliberately swerved. Wasn't that premeditated murder? The car took off, blinding me with its white headlights. The roar of an engine shattered the silence, and a final flash of light struck my eyes. Your kind protector was actually carrying out the final blow, a flight into the darkness, and here I am, tumbling head over heels into a roadside green zone, hit by someone else's bumper. After taking a few more steps in my delirium, I turned around and saw through the haze that Gu Nyanan had jumped out of the car, rushing in terror toward the body lying on the asphalt. Gu Han, what's wrong? Liu Ruyan's terrified voice rang out in my ear as she arrived. He scooped me up in his arms, frantically examining me from head to toe, and breathed a sigh of relief when he saw only the raw skin. But as soon as I turned to the crowd of onlookers, blood began to pour from my mouth. It seems your noble family has suffered another unforeseen emergency. That's exactly how novels usually describe the ruin of other people's lives. Such system messages would pop up exclusively during any contact with the main characters, whenever I heard a call from Kaiyan Shi or ran into Liu Zhumeng. Even when I simply got into the car to drive away, any attempt to communicate with these people invariably triggered text messages in my head. So this time, as soon as I noticed the first line of the warning, I abruptly pushed Liu Ruyan away and rushed toward the safety of the green lane, feeling Gu Nyanan's frightened gaze behind me. He was afraid he'd miss and wouldn't be able to hit me, but he never expected the blow to land on Liu Zhumeng, who was trying to save me. No one ever fully understood why Liu Zhumeng was there that day. I puzzled over it myself because Liu Zhumeng had never shown such concern for me before. He always looked down on me. Why would he save me at the cost of his own health? Luckily, he escaped without serious injuries. He only suffered a severe bruise on his leg, which forced him to spend some time bedridden. The Liu family took advantage of this opportunity to take Gu Nyanan to task and avoid a prison sentence. After the incident with my son, the Gu family contacted me again in the middle of the night, insistently offering to return me to the family bosom. I politely declined. I'll tell you a story, Gu Han, he began. He told her about a girl who, from an early age, stood out from the crowd. A constant swarm of thoughts and voices swirled around her, and she was persistently referred to in these texts as a heroine. She was destined to meet that one young man. At first, she was incredibly rebellious. Her life belonged solely to her. She had a plethora of plans and ambitions in her youth, and she categorically refused to believe that her destiny was merely to serve as a tool for someone else's romance. But the truth was that gradually, these damned reports kept resurfacing with merciless prophecies. After her sister's birth, attention to her waned. People in her circle constantly tried to betray or steal something valuable. Seemingly loyal friends hung around only for profit, and her end awaited her at the hands of Dai Li Qi. Reading all this horror was beyond human strength. At first, she desperately resisted, trying to prove these lines wrong and prove that she was in control of her own life, but gradually she broke down. Her faith in people crumbled day by day as the texts revealed too many secrets. The fear of trusting anyone grew with each passing hour. A bleak and hopeless existence awaited her, until one fine day, the news was filled with the appearance of a certain Nanpei. According to the text, he was a mercenary type whose eyes reflected only money. She planned to use him as a puppet and then mercilessly discard him. But in the end, everything went to hell. He returned to ruin her plans with that man. Although, in reality, it all started with a banal desire to go to that very same couple's meeting. That day, her parents told her to accompany her sister to the bookstore. As soon as she quietly opened the door, the wheel of fate creaked into motion. That very day, Liu Zhu Meng brought me to her place. At first, she waited for a familiar image to appear in the reports. But gradually it dawned on her that I was completely different, or at least strikingly different from the imposed scenario. While I might be greedy for money, I never took more than I needed, and Liu Zhu Meng generously showered me with what I needed. Frankly, I even envied her. Perhaps this is how it should be, Liu Zhu Meng thought. The comments in her head echoed this, convincing her that she was the true protagonist. And yet, Liu Zhu Meng decided to break up with me. Contrary to those voices' expectations, I didn't throw a tantrum or cling to her with all my might. The script was starting to crumble. Perhaps the cracks had been there for a long time. Liu Zhu Meng looked at me intently. The light is so bright, you know, I really did fall in love with you, Gu Han. I'm sick of all those bookish cliches about protagonists. Over the years, those voices had given her plenty of clues, but they had also forced her to make too many mistakes. She was deathly tired of predetermination. But deep down, she remained timid, terrified that every prophecy would turn out to be true. Even after we parted, she secretly tested me until I finally exposed Gu Nianan in front of everyone, proving his false nature. At that moment, the network in her head literally exploded. The cries that the plot had been broken and everything had gone wrong merged into a single roar. It was then that Liu Zhu Meng finally saw the light, realizing that all these texts had been merely a collection of other people's manipulations, not an immutable law. It was no longer possible to let fate continue to roll along its well-worn path. For years, it had been led by the nose, but now it had found a weak spot in this system. It wanted to break free and began resolutely pushing Gu Nianan away, and I simply stood by. And even though the lines in her head were becoming fewer and fewer with each passing day, her heart was breaking with pain. Unfortunately, I woke up too late, and now you must hate me, she whispered. I shook my head, remembering how much money she'd given me, and how it helped her survive the darkest days. What about you? I asked. Have all those voices that have been echoing in her head for years finally fallen silent? It seemed those foolish authors of her fate had simply vanished, leaving her alone. Remembering how silent they had been on the day of the accident, I just grinned evilly. To hell with their rules and their misaligned plot points. Putting on my most sincere smile, I said, "Since you're okay, I'll be going. I wish you a bright future and a life you can take back into your own hands. Farewell." I was about to leave when Liu Zhu Meng called out from the darkness, "Wait, actually, I can go to the village with you." He looked into my eyes and there was a plea in his gaze. "Can you see me now? All this company, the status of heir, I don't need any of it anymore. There's no point in staying here. Take me with you?" For a second, that same distant light flashed in his eyes. The once proud girl now looked completely lost, like a kitten abandoned on the street. But I merely shook my head, rejecting her with my own words. All these urban dramas were foreign to me. I simply didn't know how to explain such things to people of high society. I was leaving. As I left the hospital, Liu Ruyan was no longer in sight. The sky above shone with pristine purity, and for the first time in a long time, my soul felt light. It was time to return home and put my life in order. As soon as I crossed the threshold of my home in the village, I came face to face with my grandmother, armed with a huge broom. "You little parasite, showing up unannounced, you've made the old folks lose their temper." She immediately began to lecture me. I guiltily dodged her blows, but Grandma, quickly changing her anger to mercy, thrust a heavy shovel into my hand and ordered me to head out to the field. Life in the village returned to its usual, busy routine. Sometimes in the evenings, I thought of Liu Ruyan and my heart tingled pleasantly with a slight sadness. About 5 months had passed since my return when an unexpected visitor appeared in the middle of the village. The village headman was personally escorting a townsman who looked around curiously and then suddenly walked straight toward me. "I've been thinking about investing in your village, opening a couple of businesses so the locals can have decent jobs," the guest said, beaming. It was Liu Ruyan. "I'm completely fed up with the company. I've dumped everything on my sister and won't go back," she added with a wink. "I'm planning to travel, start a couple of pig farms. Being the village boss's wife isn't such a bad idea." So boss, will you let me in on the deal? Under the bright village sun, I laughed, hugging her around the waist as wildflower petals swirled around us. Well, I guess being the big boss was definitely within my capabilities.